Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of the Roots of the Science podcast with your girl, Anne with an E. We have reached a major milestone. We also reached another milestone of 2,000 downloads, podcast downloads, and I do not take that for granted. I just want to say thank you all so much for every person who's listened, and especially for the ones who've come back to listen to me and the amazing guests that I have. I do not take it for granted, and I hope you stick around for more. Here's two more. So now let's get into today's episode. My guest is Paulin Kantue. He refers to himself as a citizen of the world. He's born from Cameroonian parents in Italy. He moved to South Africa for most of his adult life, and now he's based in Europe. In this episode, we learned that his early influence into STEM started at a young age, but being an aeronautical engineer was cemented in 10th grade. He breaks down exactly what an aeronautical engineer is and also explains the differences between aerospace and an aeronautical engineer. He's currently a PhD student in intelligent drone research at Wits University in South Africa. He's completing his final year. Also, Paulin has 13 years of work experience, and he tells us about his work at ATE Aerospace and also at Denel, where he worked as a chief flight control system engineer. And he tells us about some exciting projects that he was involved in. Lastly, he tells us about UAV for Africa, which is a company that he founded in 2018. This is the only privately owned African aerospace company involved in academically recognized research and development. It was developed to solve African problems. So, stick around to find out about all of this and so much more. Let's go. Hi, Paulin. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. I'm so excited to hear all about you.
Yeah, no, me too. Definitely.
So let's just get into it. So please, may you just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself in terms of where you're from, where you're currently based, and what you're doing.
Okay, so my name is Paulin Kantue. I'm 30. How old am I now? 37. Born in Italy. Currently, been in Portugal for the last 6 months, or 4 months actually. I've been living in South Africa since when? Since I think 1995. So I've pretty much, so I'm although I was born in Italy, like I said, and I'm an aeronautical engineer or aerospace engineer by trade. And currently pursuing new opportunities in Europe.
Ah, fantastic. It's funny. I don't know. It just makes me feel so young when you say that. Like, I was born in '94, so you're almost like you've been in South Africa for almost as long as I like my age, basically. So that just makes me feel very, very, very young. But anyway, you said that you were born in Italy, right? And then you moved. So, do you find it like a little bit tricky when people ask you, like, that old age question of like, where you're from in terms of your identity? Do you struggle with that question, or are you good in terms of that? Could you just like elaborate further for me?
Well, I used to. I think it would be problematic if I still do at my age. But obviously, okay, what I didn't mention was I'm born to Cameroonian parents. So I do affiliate with Cameroon. It's a Central African country. So I think in terms of your question, I think I used to, but I think mainly because of that cross nationality across literally 3 countries in many regards, and so I consider myself more of a citizen of the world. I really kind of downplay that question in that sense, and I honestly do believe in such a thing, because it's nothing unique about my situation. When I did further research on just how blended people's families are, and it's just a normal thing. Although what I do kind of hold very strongly to is that I am African. I do have a strong sense of my roots in Africa, South Africa, Cameroon, just in general, the African culture, African ethos, but also just the African kind of way of viewing life, with song and dance and colorful attires and so forth. So that in essence, even though I have a very clear and clear appetite for European culture, obviously being raised in Italy, so I have no issue actually kind of being integrated or assimilating myself in the European culture. But I stand very I guess the word is, I stand very, very strong in my uniqueness in being an African boy.
No, I completely understand. And it's great that you identify. I think that question is always very tricky, and with our generation and the generation to come and after that, there's just, like you said, there's just so much blendedness, and it's gonna get so hazy to even ask that question, like, oh, where are you from? Like you said, sometimes it's just easier to say you are a citizen of the world. I think it's simpler, it's more simplified. And just speaking of your, where you grew up and your influences in terms of being from Cameroon, your parents being from Cameroon, etc. I just want then us to kind of take it all the way back to understand, you are an aeronautical engineer, but what were some of the influences that actually got you into this wonderful world of, STEM? Did you always know that this is something that you always wanted to do? Or was it something that, kind of just happened? Because sometimes these things do just happen. So, yeah, I just want to find out the roots of your science, please.
So I think for me, my dad is a mechanical engineer, or at least graduated as one. So he was always kind of prone to, and I'm the only son, so you can already imagine the pressure. So he was always prone to kind of throw me in very manly, kind of, let's fix the car, come look how the car is, and this is what the generator does, and this is a spark plug, and this is probably when I was 6, 7, and prior to that, he made it a point for me, when we were in Italy specifically, he made a point for me to play with lots of Legos. So I had a very kind of innovative upbringing, just in terms of just letting my creative juices flow from a very young age, and obviously being able to access all that, being born and raised in Europe for at least a while. So I think my kind of appetite for science and how things work started very young. But then obviously specifically to aeronautical engineering, it actually got cemented in standard 8. That's what, grade 8, grade 10. Can't remember how the grading works.
Grade 10. Grade 10.
So it got STEM there, or at least it got very, very, very real there. When it's actually quite interesting when I tell people the story. Not interesting, but just very finite for me in terms of what I wanted to do. So I found a newspaper article, I think it was on a Sunday Times, and it was about what does an aeronautical engineer do. And I remember kind of, kind of with scissors, just kind of snipping that job profile off the one page and sticking it on the study cupboard wall, and that was that. And since then, I said that's what I wanted to do since grade 10.
Wow.
And so I feel very fortunate to kind of even when I tell you the story is to kind of use that as a kind of a defining moment in my life.
Yeah.
And obviously I had, but obviously my idea of it or where it would take me was slightly different then. I mean, it obviously spoke a lot about space or being involved in space or being involved in things that fly. So obviously, and as a child, obviously you're just thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to be an astronaut, or you're gonna work with astronauts, or you're gonna work with the stuff that astronauts uses. But that was good because that allowed me and any kid really to dream much more than the practical that the world kind of offers you, and that fuels the passion really. So that was my kind of defining kind of clarity in terms of career choice in grade 10.
I love that story, and it's like you said, it's quite significant that at that specific point you had a very unique idea, because I think I personally didn't even know what an aeronautical engineer was until you mentioned it. So it's really great that you actually got to live out your dream, like you said, although it wasn't what you thought it is, but you are currently living in it. And while we're on the topic, you said that what your idea was different to the practicality of it. So just explain to somebody who doesn't know what an aeronautical engineer is. What do they do? What is it?
Okay. So it's quite broad. So aeronautical engineering is really, I call it a space mechanic.
Okay.
And so it's a mechanical engineer that just has broadened his interest and his or hers interest in things, specifically in things that fly or in things that are not on the ground.
Okay. Hence the name aeronautical or aero.
The name. But now your job, and obviously depending on where you want to kind of specialize or what your field of interest is in a general sense, you get taught, at least in university, undergrad, you get taught to understand the various factors or the various, just kind of, different lenses that makes each of these or most of these aircrafts or most of these systems that fly work. So it's both from how they are built and also how they are modeled or analyzed on the computer, or it's also how they are manufactured, in terms of mass production, like, the airplanes that we fly for airlines, or more rockets, like probably you've heard of the likes of SpaceX.
Yes.
Who does amazing things with Elon Musk, or you go into satellites, where it's for communications, and the stuff that allows me and you to speak today has got an aeronautical engineer designed the satellite.
Wow.
Or aerospace engineer, really. And that's, so aeronautical and aerospace, the only difference really, the reason why there's a difference is because some universities, unlike Wits, other universities, mainly European and US universities, try and bring what they call astronautics, which is really just, space-related dynamics of these objects, of these flying objects. So i.e., how would an aeroplane behave itself in space? Obviously, it will behave itself very badly, but the point is to understand those dynamics. And that's what kind of makes a difference between an aeronautical and an aerospace engineer. But ultimately, it's literally everything's exactly the same, except that little component that aerospace engineers have had a little bit of training on. It's really not that different, to be fair.
So in terms of undergrad, let's say, for example, as a person starting out, you start studying aeronautical engineering. It's not mechanical engineering. There's a straight direct course in aeronautical engineering.
Well, so hence, I think when I started kind of explaining, so it's really a mechanical engineer. So i.e., a mechanical engineer is a very broad, and if you don't know what you want to be as an engineer, I'm just being very general now, but if you don't really know what you want to be an engineer, a mechanical engineer is a very good choice. And the main reason for that is because it touches on so many aspects of engineering. Unlike specific engineering fields, like, for example, aeronautical, which has to go through a lot of mechanical engineering subjects. Same thing like a chemical engineer or an electrical engineer or metallurgy engineer or geology engineer or mining engineer. All of them kind of have to go through some mechanical engineering subjects. So basically what I'm saying is that as an undergrad, you all start from the same point.
Then you specialize.
And then you kind of, I think at Wits at least, I think third year onwards is when you start specializing towards your various fields, like I mentioned them.
No, thank you so much. That was for just giving that picture. It makes me understand. So speaking of Wits, you are currently in your last year of your PhD, and you're in the field of intelligent drone systems. Can you explain what your research is about and why it's important?
Okay, so my research, my PhD research is about understanding the impact of having drones be smarter so that they can be safer in order for them to be integrated within the human space. So currently, I think the research rationale is that a lot of the drones now, the main reason why they need so much infrastructure, like a pilot and all the safety mechanism that goes around it, that's if obviously you use drones not for a hobby but commercially, which a lot of companies do. Fundamentally, a drone is not built to be smart in itself. So it's not built to self-diagnose. It's not built to make its own decision based on the data that it itself has collected about itself. And that really goes into kind of the neurology of humankind, how we can self-diagnose when we're sick, for example, how we can self-diagnose when we have a cold, how we can self-diagnose when we're bleeding on in one of our fingers, or and that is the idea of my research, is to combine a very acute understanding of how drones fly with some neurology of self-diagnosis and what they call fault tolerance. So basically just meaning that the drone is able to tolerate some of its faults, like we are able to tolerate a cold and still survive or still carry on out without necessarily falling out of the sky. This is another drone I'm speaking about. That's where the kind of the link between the drone's smart diagnosis systems impact safety of people on the ground. And because ultimately, if something falls out of the sky, it can hurt, if not fatally injure someone.
Yeah.
And obviously drones come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So I think that's my research in a nutshell. So it really tries to kind of investigate and answer the question of bringing about safer drones through artificial intelligence specifically.
That's so fascinating. That's some very fascinating work. I didn't realize that, you can go into such detail, but it's important, like you said. I mean, you don't want something to be falling from the sky. So the work that you guys are doing is very interesting. It's cool, especially in this day and age where I think, people using drones it's picking up because it's being used like not only, like you said, not only for recreational purposes, but for industry. And I know like in agriculture systems as well, it's also being heavily used there. So that's really, really cool. And so speaking of that, apart from the PhD, you also worked as a chief flight control system engineer for a South African firm called Denel in Centurion. Although now, of course, you've resigned and you're going to pursue another opportunity in Europe. Congratulations on that, by the way. And can you just tell us what you did there? That'll be quite interesting to just kind of know it apart from just the research in terms of the whole practical implementation in a company in terms of what you did there.
So my journey in Denel is very interesting. So prior to Denel, it was also quite an interesting 4 years prior to Denel. I was working predominantly in a company called ATE Aerospace that basically manufactured and designed kind of systems retrofitted systems for Russian helicopters. So that's my love for helicopters specifically grew from there. And that's actually under them. That's why I did my master's during that time, part-time. Then obviously Denel was really kind of I was striving for really where I wanted to get into, which was more kind of control and behavior analysis or behavior, basically control of behavior of airborne systems, and that we call that control systems. So you're able to control the behavior or control its movement. And that was really what kind of led eventually to a PhD. So in Denel, so we obviously started as a kind of just a normal engineer, and I was part of some really exciting projects. Some of them are obviously quite confidential, but ultimately I was in the design, where you design certain software, what they call flight control software. Basically, like I said, it's software that kind of emulates into the control of such airborne systems. And my exposure was quite vast, where I was able to not only design the software, but also be part of a team that eventually tests it on kind of, on the computer lab, and then tested on the hardware itself while the hardware is in front of you, and eventually go down to various Air Force bases and fly it and see how it works. analyze it at the Air
Wow.
Force Base. And then obviously kind of do the reporting, do the presentation to clients, and then obviously grew my seniority through kind of repeating those roles in more detail and those functions in more detail throughout the 8 years that I was there. So yeah, very, 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 it was quite amazing time working with incredibly, in my view, probably the best nucleus of aerospace, or if not, I can call it that, aerospace engineers that in South Africa. Definitely, I can say it without a doubt. There wasn't second to none in terms of just the amount of not only talent, but also experience in terms of just the different types of systems we worked on. And this is across the board from, really, really heavy drones to missiles, to glider drones. It's just a nucleus of incredible talent kind of buzzing at trying to solve various problems for international markets. So I was eventually being part of that and ultimately gaining a lot of experience that has propelled me to the level of experience that I have now.
Fantastic. Don't you feel like you're living your childhood dream? Well, you are living your childhood dream. I'm just hearing you talk about all these really interesting projects that you're working on. Like looking back at when you think of yourself when you were in standard 8 or grade 10, in those moments, like you're actually living your dream.
Well, it's funny you say that because I mean, specifically when what we call flight tests. So it's basically a testing. You've done all the design work that you could have. You've done all the reviews that you could have. You've done all the preparation that you could have. Now you pack up everything, and then you go down to the test range, which needs to be a massive kind of open space dedicated for testing, really powerful weapons and powerful kind of systems. Then it's the moment of truth. And, you get almost similar to kind of NASA style countdown.
Oh, wow.
And that's when it hits you. You're like, wow, yes, this is, there's nothing sweeter. And also you're not just a spectator, you are an integral part of the process. You are, I was a design authority, so you are responsible for your team's output. And yes, it does pinch you, and then you also kind of, it pinches you or you get pinched, and you kind of, have an out of body experience that, this is me and this is where I am. But then all of a sudden it's like a rush of fear and a rush of hoping that this works. Now,
I can imagine.
Quickly replaces that daisy wandering boy, is next to the red button. so I think, and I believe that's what happens with every single engineer that kind of is at the face of a momentous event. Is yes, they get pinched for maybe a nanosecond, but then that goes away very fast, because you mess up and you forget why you're there. The whole team will look at you and say, listen, what did you do?
Oh man, yeah, but I can't imagine. I was just thinking, like what you were saying in terms of even the SpaceX people when they had that launch. I'm sure they also had those exact same feelings. So that must be something else. But I think it just sounds really cool. Like I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, that's really, really cool. So just to carry on with our conversation,
yes.
In 2018 you founded a company called UAV for Africa. this is the
Yes.
only privately owned African aerospace company involved in academically recognized research and development. So wow, that's fantastic. So I just want to find out, what was the driving force for you to establish this company? And while you answer that, can you also just answer what were some of the challenges, if any, that you might have faced while you were starting this company? Because I can imagine, aerospace engineering is a predominantly white-dominated field.
Yes.
So can you just touch on those two things in your answer?
Okay. Sure. Okay. Well, I think so the main reason why I started UAV for Africa was quite simple. I felt that Africa can produce SpaceX material systems or SpaceX level systems. And what I mean by that is, yes, there's a lot of companies that are doing incredible jobs in STEM in general, but to a lesser extent in aerospace in Africa. Denel is one of them, and unfortunately, it's also got its own challenges. But the idea was, and this idea really started a while back, was to say we can do more through a combination of bringing in academia and really leveraging really talented and experienced engineers who've had the exposure, and upskill those academia in order for them to produce innovative systems that are of commercial value. And that's really the essence of UAV for Africa. It is trying to merge something that has been left in the doldrums for many, many decades in trying to about exciting, original, but also applicable products within the aerospace field to solve African problems. And that's really in a crux. That's what that. And now you can obviously imagine the challenges that goes with it. And most of them is. So who are you again? Why are you not towing the line? Why are you not just flying a drone and taking pictures? Or why are you interested in designing and coming up with research that is internationally recognized? And that's where my PhD kind of is still the kind of the forerunner of the strategy beyond UAV for Africa. It's trying to kind of bring about research that obviously a PhD has to be internationally recognized. So that is the forerunner, but also kind of the spin-off of that is the various systems that our interns are currently working on that have a very impactful result in hopefully producing products that we can sell. And unfortunately, the challenges has been mainly down to understanding. Very few people within the African space understand what it means to do academically recognized engineering.
Okay.
You almost just do engineering because you have an idea and you kind of build it, and then you sort of kind of test it, and if it works, it works. But you don't really know why the science of it works. And the science of it is there's a methodology behind it. There's a method. There is,
of course,
there's an hypothesis that you're trying to answer. And there's a
with specific objectives.
Exactly. And so ultimately now you potentially are able to kind of deal with drones that are completely different to what you would have just designed, because you didn't really think about its impact. You just thought about what you could make. So I think that's really, so it really goes down to specifically in terms of actual practical things that I'm talking about, which is very exciting. We're talking about a drone that potentially can make use of methane as a power source, and methane I don't know if you know what methane is, but methane is ultimately a gas that is produced by the very thing that Africans have in abundance, which is animals. And all of a sudden, your power source from a battery is no longer required, but just a power source from a cow or a power source from a pig. But obviously, the technology or the science behind it to provide the drone with power is where the crux is. So these are the type of kind of questions we're answering or trying to answer in order to, again, answer the African problem in an African way, but yet not negating that it can be answered in a very high-tech, yet potentially low-cost fashion. So the challenges you can imagine, as I'm not really kind of going into them because they are enormous. Most of them are knowledge-based, and because it's knowledge, there is ignorance, and because there's ignorance, there's also a bit of prejudice through that ignorance. But ultimately, I think educating through a platform like yours and others really kind of breaks those barriers and makes the people understand, oh, okay, they're onto something. They actually are kind of, they're on our side. They're not trying to take, kind of our jobs or, what we used to do. They're trying to make it better, without necessarily.
Can I just ask something?
Yes.
Sorry to cut you. In terms of the prejudice, where does it come from? Does it come from the people who've been in this field for a long time, or is it coming from the people on the ground who you're trying to solve these problems for? Where does that lack of understanding, everything that you're mentioning, coming from? Where does it really come from?
Well, it comes from various aspects. I think obviously depending on your source of ignorance or your lack of where your lack of understanding actually is, will easily dictate the type of prejudice or the level or your severity of prejudice that you might have towards, for example, myself or one of our engineers kind of, proposing an idea. But honestly speaking, it's never really the person on the ground. It's usually someone who's threatened in not having come up with the idea themselves.
Oh, okay. I understand.
So it's and that's really where it's usually someone who kind of has the power to affect it, but he just doesn't know how, or he hasn't really spent the time in thinking about it. And that's usually, guys who are either have their own companies or sometimes even investors who kind of invest in other type of drone companies that might be doing something similar in terms of building a drone that does something, but not necessarily being scientific in being able to kind of make sure that drone actually has gone through a rigorous methodology. There's an actual rationale to why this drone looks the way it does, and not just because it works. So I think, but that's why for us we've made sure that, and so our strategy really behind trying to deal with all this prejudice is to really try and go alone as much as we can until we have a very solid grounding on the systems that we've designed, because ultimately it will stand by itself, and all that prejudice will really go away with time. Or you join, or you just keep quiet.
The work will speak for itself.
That's right. Yeah.
The work will speak for itself. So, this is a really good chat, but just to, kind of touch on what you're saying and also just wrapping it up. How do you deal with, I know you touched on it a little bit, but how do you deal with all those issues and problems? And also, you are a very busy guy. Like, you do a lot. You do a lot. So how do you how do you manage? And also, as you answer that, what advice would you give to somebody who is interested in what you're doing, or just in STEM in general?
So I think that obviously let me answer kind of, just how do I manage, because I think that will hopefully answer quite a few. So I think, even my colleagues at work, obviously, when I started the company and while I'm still doing a PhD, and I'm kind of leading everybody towards good results, we're kind of wondering, when do you sleep? When do you, obviously I'm married and I've got a 5-year-old son.
Sure. You see now.
Yes. So I think I think probably one of my biggest character traits, if I were to pick one, is I plan until I'm nauseous. So every single thing that I do is somehow written somewhere, and is scheduled and has a very clear objective. And obviously, so I use a lot of tools to keep my task at hand. I know exactly what I need to be doing, because then it gives me the freedom to not be fixated with the problem, but kind of park it when I need to now focus on my son, or I need to focus on my wife, or I need to focus on, and then you all of a sudden you realize you actually do have time. You just because you fixated, you think you don't, and by the virtue that you don't actually switch off. So I don't have a problem switching off, because I think I've got a very good system in keeping tabs of everything that I need to be doing across the various spheres that I'm involved in. So I think that's probably, to answer that question in terms of how do I juggle it all, I've got a system. I think you need to have a system. So my encouragement to really students, or specifically students across really just any field, is find your system. What works for me might not work for you, but find yours. If you multitasking is not for everyone, I know that very well. Even those who are really good at what they do, all of a sudden they need to multitask, they become really bad. So multitasking is not for everyone. One will argue it's a character thing that you grow into as you get older. Hopefully you work on it. But definitely it is a balance that you can get to, and I strive for it. I mean, I change my task literally 4 or 5 times a day in terms of priority. My list is never set like a week in advance. There's no such, or else you will eventually fall behind. So I think that my balance is, or at least my method is what I use. And I believe, the guys who are also kind of trying this. And obviously, I'm very passionate. I'm incredibly passionate about what I do. As you can imagine, it's really something that I've started kind of pursuing. And don't get me wrong, with plenty of failures along the way. But nonetheless, passion is what kind of keeps you going beyond those failures. And I have failed. I have failed at school. I have failed at work. So I've got a lot more failures to kind of speak of. But the passion and the willingness to want to be more and produce more is what kind of gets you over those humps. And a system, like I said, to kind of keep you balanced.
No, I that's really solid advice, and it's really great. Like you said, just find what works for you. It's a trial and error sort of a thing, but it's been so lovely chatting with you and just teaching me. I've learned a lot today, and everything that you're doing sounds really exciting, and I wish you all of the best in terms of all of your future endeavors, not only with the company, but with the PhD as well. So, thank you so much for taking the time.
And I appreciate the time.
Yeah, and to everybody else who's listening, thank you for listening to another episode of the Roots of the Suns podcast with your girl, Anne with an E.